وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on the meanings of key concepts of the Qur'an, in which we're looking at this beautiful work by one of the great early Imams of Islam, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, called Tahsilu Nadha'ir al-Qur'an, Attaining unto the key meanings of the Qur'an. And this work, he wrote it for a particular purpose, but he highlights what is the core meaning of a lot of the key vocabulary of the Qur'an, and then that all the usages arise from the core meaning, right? It's a beautiful insight. So today we'll be looking at 4 key concepts: shirk, associating partners; sawa, that one thing being like another; marad, sickness; and corruption. But before we look at these, just to recap quickly, we saw in the first class, and you can access that from our forum, from our YouTube page, that after introducing the work, etc., we looked at two key foundational concepts. The first of which was hidayah, guidance, and he chose to begin with hidayah. Why? Or huda, guidance, because the Qur'an defines itself as huda. And anyone recall what's the core meaning of huda? What is the core meaning of huda? It's inclining, right? The core meaning of huda is al-mail, is to make something incline, right? And that gives us a lot to reflect on. And guidance is to facilitate for another to incline towards what they should incline towards, right? And that's the many usages of, now to make them incline, you clarify things. If they incline to something, then they will submit to it. That's the meaning of Islam. Divine oneness is for one's inclination be towards the one, right? Religion is huda, because what is religion? It's to incline to the path of Allah's good pleasure, right? Dua, right? Because dua is your inclining in need to Allah, right? Insight is that you have right inward inclination towards meanings, right? And there's a beautiful discussion of basira, of insight, and how it's cultivated. And there are many other meanings of huda that we looked at. He mentions 15 main meanings of how tawbah, its inclination, right? Because tawbah is to re-incline towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Tawbah is return, which is re-inclination. And we also saw kufr. May Allah protect us from it. What is kufr? What's the root meaning of kufr? To cover over, right? That's why in the Arabic language, a farmer is called a kafir. In one usage, the most common one is fallah, because they reap fruit, but insofar as they cover over the seeds, that is kufr, right? That's why expiation is called kafara, because it covers over our sins, etc. And we saw that there are usages of kufr, right? Kufr has to do with rejection, right? Rejecting the truth of something. But kufr is also used in the Qur'an to mean wrongdoing, because you cover what is just by wrongdoing. There's also the aspect of opposing and refusing to accept, just active disbelief, right? From the same root. And then there is the lesser kufr, which is to cover over blessings through ingratitude. This is kufranun ni'mah, denial of blessings. Right? So today we're going to begin in part 1, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, by looking at shirk. Right? Shirk. Now, shirk is generally translated as associating partners with Allah. Right? But shirk in Arabic comes from the notion of being attached to something. And you can say, like, two people work together. So two people start a business. Say, huwa shariki, he's my partner. Are you associating him with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. Right? Right? So shirk is attachment to something. Right? Shirk in the Arabic language has attachment to another. The root meaning of shirk is attachment to another. Jazakumullah khair. Right? So, for example, a partner, because two of you are attached to one another in a particular line of work. So they're your sharik. But is it bad to have a partner? No. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Sayyidina Musa to go to Fir'aun, Sayyidina Musa asks for Sayyidina Harun to partner with him in this matter. He's not associating any partners with Allah, right? But is this to be attached to another, right? Like make him come with me. Ashrikhu fi amri, right? Let him partner me in this, right? Right? And that which the hunter captures something, which is called the shirk, right? Because that's what you capture with, because you can attach to something with it. The strap of a sandal in Arabic is called shirakun na'al, right? Because it has a sense of it connects, right? The sandal to your foot, or because you have two straps, right? Like a sandal that has the strap. There's two straps, so it connects. So it has this sense of attachment to another. But then, in the general religious use, shirk, he says, and يجعل لأحد في ملك الله تعالى علاقة فيراه مالكا معه. So shirk in the religious sense, the negative sense, is to be attached to anything in Allah's dominion such that you consider it to have mastery or power with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Is that you have an attachment besides Allah such that you associate some of what is associated with Allah to it. So, right? So, now shirk has one usage which is fairness, right? Which is when you become, or fairness, adl, or balance, or partnering. That's not a negative usage of shirk. Like in the case of Sayyidina Musa asking for Harun, right? You say here is adl, right? Is that we will both partner in this, right? So each has shared responsibility. So there's the idea of shared responsibility or shared rights, right? And it's come like this in even the usage of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That if the buyer and the seller are honest are true and have sincere concern for one another, they'll be sharing in the good. Right? It's come about this, the seeker, the teacher and the student, that they are sharikani fil khair. They are partners in good. So fairness, or in the idea of sharing in general, this is not a negative usage. The idea of sharing, it's not a negative sense. Sharika or shirk in the Qur'an has come with the meaning of worship of other than Allah. Right? Because you take another, you become attached to another besides Allah, associating a meaning only befitting Allah to them. Right? So worshipping, being attached to other than Allah in the meaning of worship is shirk. Right? It's being used in that way in the Qur'an, and also you see it in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So the same word in some senses cannot be negative. Shirk, is shirk bad? Not in the sense of shirka, right? Of partnering with another, worldly matter, whatever. But attachment to another besides Allah in worship, such that you worship other than Allah, takes you out of the fold of Islam, right? 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 And it's also used in terms of affirming a relationship, right? Right? And right? Shirk is that idea of attachment to other. So the Arabs used it in this way, and this is something that the pre-Islamic Arabs, for example, called someone Abdul Harith, for example, right? They're not worshipping Harith, but it meant that they have a relationship with Harith, right? Now, but that's a meaning befitting only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, generally, but it's not done in the sense of worshipping Harith, but in the sense of, right? So this is a shirk of relationship, that you ascribe your being a servant of other than Allah. Because abd can refer to a worshipper, can refer to a servant. Now, according to the majority of Islamic scholarship, it is sinful for someone to be called abd of anything besides Allah. The meaning is sound insofar as abd can refer to a slave or a servant, someone who serves another. It can be used in this, relative sense, but it's unbecoming. In that sense, it is a shirk of relationship. But if someone is called Abdu Yaqub, we won't say you're a kafir. No, because this is a shirk of relationship, not a shirk of worship, right? But it's still wrong. Should not be done. And then there's a fourth usage of shirk, which is shirk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have used shirk with the meaning of insincerity or showing off. Right? Insincerity. That's the fourth meaning. Why? The Prophet ﷺ, for example, tells us Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ, so whoever is hopeful for the meeting of their Lord, فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, let them perform actions that are righteous, وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا, and associate none with Allah in His worship. Meaning, seek no other in your worship of Allah with Allah. Meaning, have no element of insincerity in your worship. If someone is worshipping other than Allah, then they're not a believer. So how would they be? So the issue would not arise. So for a believer, right? Because if you were worshipping other than Allah, would it be described as a righteous action? No. Right? Whoever longs for the meeting of their Lord, let them perform a righteous action, which is an action in accordance with the Sunnah, outwardly, and inwardly with sincerity. And then not associate any with Allah in His worship, meaning not have any element of insincerity in their worship. From Surah Al-Kahf. So shirk there is not be attached in seeking of reward or seeking of gain to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make your worship purely for Allah. Right? So this is referring to not having any element of insincerity, of riya, which is to seek other than Allah through your acts of devotion. But there's a great deal of emphasis there, right? So whoever hopes for the meeting of Allah, right? So if you hope for the meeting of Allah, that is sincerity. فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. If you hope for the meeting of Allah, so this is the sincerity of what? Of purpose. But then you have to have the sincerity of action. How? Let them do deeds that are salih, that are righteous. What is the righteous deed? The early Muslims said it's in accordance with the Sunnah outwardly, inwardly, it is sincere. But then, if you've done these, you're hoping for Allah. You're doing a righteous deed. That will be pleasing to Allah. But that's not it. وَلَا يُشْرِكْ, and have no element of insincerity. Associate no partners, meaning don't allow any ulterior motives besides the pleasure of Allah creep in to your acts of devotion to Allah. But you see the caution one needs for one's sincerity, right? Make Allah your goal. مَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ. Hope. What is your hope in life? To meet Allah in a good state. What's your choice in life? To do righteous deeds, which entails sincerity. But that's not it. But then you have to guard yourself against creeping insincerity. To guard yourself against creeping insincerity. Right? 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 Because Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi explains that insincerity, riya, is one of the usages for shirk, like in Surah Al-Kahf. And in the words of the Prophet ﷺ, that what I fear most from you is the lesser shirk. So the Sahaba said, what is the lesser shirk, O Messenger of Allah? The Prophet ﷺ said, Ar-riya, insincerity. Right? Why? Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi explains, our author, that a person does an action seeking to that favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And to be honored by Allah and to have station from Allah. But that hope of station and benefit with Allah, right, is subtle. And the human being connects to the tangible. So what happens? That seeking of reward from Allah, if you're not careful, you're seeking rank with Allah in the hereafter, seeking honor from Allah. Each of these, the reward, the honor, the rank, can easily deprecate into seeking reward, honor, and rank that is immediate and tangible from creation. Because the human beings being created with love of the immediate and the tangible. Right? So one needs to guard oneself from this subtle insincerity. Right? So in this sense, it is shirk. Because something whose reward and honor and rank you are seeking only from Allah, it can creep in. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said that insincerity creeps into one's actions more subtly than a black ant in the black of night on a black stone. Right? That subtly. So one needs to be aware of it. Right? And in that sense, the whole journey of the believer is a journey from insincerity to sincerity. Right? And how does one leave insincerity? By leaving one's desires and whims. By leaving one's desires and whims and having one aim. By having tawheedul qasd, having one aim, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And typically having one aim is only attained by having consistent remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So that is a little bit about shirk, right, as the word, right? So the meaning is this attachment to other, right? It has a general usage. Worldly usage is not harm. Like a partner, because the two of you are attached. But in worship, that you attach yourself to worship other than Allah, that's kufr. But then you bring in others in meanings befitting only Allah, it is blameworthy, could even reach kufr. And then there's insincerity, which is sinful and diminishes reward or wipes it out. Then a word he goes into at length, right, which is sawa. And we won't go into it at length. Sawa comes from balance, from two things being equal, right? And it's come in many different ways in the Qur'an. So we won't be going into it at much length, right? But sawa, which is for two things to be the same, right? It has the sense of justice. Kalimatin sawa, a just word between us, a fair word between us. Kalimatin sawa in baynana wa baynakum. And sawa is also be used in the Qur'an to refer to La ilaha illallah, because it's a statement of balance, because it is that which puts everything in its due place, right? Right? Because the divinity of Allah relates to all things equally, right? Right? It has other usages as well. Sawa refers to balance, right? It has to do with the Sharia has referred to as from siwa, sawi. It is a balanced way. It's a balanced way. It's a way without any crookedness or any imbalance, right? It's upright. Sawa, yani siratan sawiya also has to do with the focused, purposeful way. And being just also is from sawa. So these are a few of the usages. It's a secondary word I just wanted to point out as making one thing level with another. So it's being used for being just. It is also used in the Qur'an in other places for La ilaha illallah, because the word of balance. Because unless you realize that all things are from Allah, you're not viewing things with balance. We are not people who give rights to some and not to others. Because what is all of creation? هذا خلق الله. This is all the creating of Allah. Existentially, all things have one relationship, which is there Allah is creating, right? Now, a word we're going to expand on a little more is marad, sickness. Based on the traditional notion of this balance. Now, what is sickness? How would you describe sickness?
Something that is unwell.
Something that's unwell. But what does it mean for something to be unwell?
Imbalanced.
Imbalanced. How? You're in the right.
From its natural state.
Really good, mashallah. Very good. Right? So sickness, right, is for the self to be affected with something foreign to its sound constitution. Right? There's a right nature to things. So sickness of the self is from your sound human disposition to be mixed with something that is foreign to its balanced, sound, healthy constitution. Right? So sickness is foreign to the balance by which the human being has been created. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have created the human in the best of balances. Right? But what is that balance? What is that balance? That balance, as some of the ulama have mentioned, right? That balance is that Allah has created within us the potential for ill and the potential for good. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Right? That within the human being, there's the potential for ill choices and the potential for good choices. Sickness, the health, is where the potential for good remains manifest and the potential for ill choices, it's there, but remains subsumed. Remains subsumed. Right? Because there's a right balance. Those potentialities are there. Right? Just as we have parts of the body that we manifest, the face, the hands, etc. But if someone covers everything except their rear end, right? Your rear was always there. It's you who exposed it, right? So there's a right balance to the human being. Health is when things are in right balance. When you bring in something from the outside that disturbs that balance, or inwardly you create an imbalance, so that which is meant to be suppressed, right, is expressed, and that which is meant to be expressed is suppressed, that is sickness. Right? Right? Like most people at some point during the day, they need to go to the washroom. But unless, of course, someone is physically sick, for them, while they're sitting in other people's company, for them to urinate, that's a sick action, because that's meant to be suppressed, but expressing that which is meant to be, because that is creating this imbalance. Right? Sickness is for the self to be mixed with something foreign to its constitution, or to imbalance one's constitution, such as what is meant to be expressed of beauty, of good, of truth, of justice. The meanings pleasing to Allah, spiritual or worldly, for them to be repressed, and for the meanings that are meant to be restrained, to be expressed, that is sickness. So sickness arises from imbalance. So he explains some of the usages of sickness in the Qur'an. Right? One of them is doubt. Doubt. And also hypocrisy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us regarding people affected by hypocrisy, في قلوبهم مرض, in their heart is sickness. Right? Why? Because there's doubt. Because what is meant to be manifest, which is faith, right? Faith, guidance, good, truth, justice, is suppressed. And you've allowed, and usually it happens due to external instigation or allowing yourself to be affected externally. Right? So they listened to the instigators of doubt, disbelief, hypocrisy, etc. Why were most of the hypocrites, they're affected by what? By non-Muslims, by disbelievers whom they heard, kept the company of, and were cowed by, or by the leaders of hypocrisy, and by allowing that external negative influence to come, it created an internal imbalance. And that's why it's called sickness. Right? It's not just mere in their hearts, it's sickness, right? Which is doubt. But why is there doubt? Because of something foreign to the natural order, they allowed this imbalance internally to happen. Right? Right? Doubt, and that's why hypocrisy itself. What is hypocrisy? Right? Because hypocrisy, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi says, hypocrisy enters the heart. That's why, very interestingly, nifaq is the same as, from the same root as a nafaq, a tunnel. Because something entered your heart. Right? And the tunnel of like a groundhog is called an nafaq. Why? And they use it from that because a groundhog, right, would gather its provision in its tunnel. So people would think, other animals would find, okay, there are two tunnels. So it appears that the groundhog enters from here, comes out from here. So animals and people too would think that there are only two exits to the tunnel. But it would not be as it seemed. Why? Because the groundhog, being smart, would always create a false exit, which would dig a hole but leave only a little bit of the ground covered. So if attacked from the apparent entry and exit, it would have another way out. So it deceived, and it made things seem a certain way, entry, exit. But there was a hidden outlet, but just covered over by just a little bit of soil. So from the outside you couldn't see it. But when tested, it would squirt out. That's one of the explanations why nifaq comes from that same idea of nafaq, of a tunnel. That it doesn't seem the way it is, because there's another exit. Right? Likewise, so that's how doubt creeps in. Right? And doubt can lead to hypocrisy. Right? Right? A lot of sickness comes by allowing oneself to listen to waswasa, right? To ill insinuations. الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. Right? And the waswasa comes from jinn, who are the agents of the shaitan, to misguide. But the role of the shayateen, of the whisperings, the whispering insinuations, as we know from the last surah of the Qur'an. Right? There are human beings that fulfill the work of the devils. Why? Because what they say, يوسوس في صدور الناس, it casts within the heart of humans, casts in doubts. Right? And what does it do? A few of them just may roil it up, but if there's enough of them, it can cause actual sickness. A little bit could diminish your iman a little bit, spoil your worship a little bit, but enough comes in, there can be an actual transformation. You get extremely sick. So this is doubt. And that's the relationship between sickness, and that's how we understand sickness. So being aware of what influences you externally, and also being aware of one's own thoughts inwardly. So we don't allow ill thoughts to predominate over the thoughts of good. Another meaning of, very different meaning of marad, of sickness, is zina. Is zina, right? Unlawful sexual acts. Why? Right? They say because, and Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi said, because zina, right, is a fulfillment of desire. What is, but in a sinful way, right? A sinful way. So the fulfillment of desire has a sound expression, which is what, in the way that is acceptable and pleasing to Allah, which is with one's spouse. So when one fulfills one's desire in a wrongful way, right, one has allowed an imbalance to enter into one's disposition externally, either by accepting, or internally, either by self-temptation or by allowing temptations to come in and to create this imbalance. But there's a natural, healthy order, right? Natural, healthy order, which is to fulfill those relations in the context of marriage, or for the one who's not married, to take the means of restraining their desires, as the Prophet ﷺ said. There's a third usage of sickness, which is physical sickness. Physical sickness. Right? 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 Which arises from imbalances. Some of those imbalances can be addressed by avoiding imbalance in one's diet, in one's habits, in one's sleep, in one's living, etc. And health, and also by avoiding negative external, environmental, relational influences that cause one's health not to be affected. There's other things that are beyond one's control, right? You walked into a glass wall and you broke your nose. Sickness, you're sick, but you couldn't really have done much about it, right? Or, you got affected by something, and that's bala from Allah. That's just a test from Allah. And because there are things that are within one's ability to take care of when it comes to one's health from within, to maintain the right balance, the right physical balance, and is praiseworthy to take that. And there's things that one can avoid from around one to preserve health, right? The fourth thing that we're going to look at, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is the concept of fasad, of corruption. And this is similar to sickness, right? that fasad, fasad has the sense of breaking something, right? And he says corruption is spoiling something from the good state Allah made it in. Allah tells us, أحسن كل شيء خلقه. Allah has made good everything that He has created. Right? تبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. You know, exalted is Allah, the best of creators. Right? ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت. You don't see imbalance in Allah's creation. Everything has hikmah. Right? So fasad is when you break the good state, the good order in which Allah has created things in. Right? Right? Because the world has been created بحسن تقدير, right? With perfected decree and destiny, and by the divine plan is characterized by wisdom. Right? So if you vitiate that, right, you are separating something that had been brought together well, and that separation is called fasad. When something is in right order and you, right? And that's why, interestingly, outside of the context of this, one should be very wary that one of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the shaitan will do is the shaitan will call people to change Allah's creation. So a believer, by just their appreciation of divine wisdom, will be very wary of chemical foods and, you know, and engineered foods and things and artificial things and so on. Why? Because the natural state of thing is incomparably better, right? That's a separate matter. So this word corruption has multiple usages. Amongst them, yufsidun, fasad has become used frequently in the Qur'an to refer to engaging in sin. Right? Right? Why? Because the earth has been created with purpose. Why has the earth been created? As a mazra'ah for the hereafter. The earth has been created as a harvest ground for the hereafter. The good of this life has been created to pursue the good of the next life. That is its purpose. وَابْتَغِي بِمَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةِ. Seek with all that Allah has granted you the next abode. That is the purpose of what Allah has placed in creation. وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Don't forget your share of this life. You enjoy, the burger, this, that, as part of the natural order thing, without losing priority of your ultimate aim. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَبْغِ الْفَسَادَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And do not seek corruption on earth. Allah created this world. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. O Lord, you did not create this in vain. Right? There's a good order to the way things are, which are what? That this world has been created in this beautiful order, and everything in it is there's a natural balance in creation. But the human being has been granted choice. What is the natural balance that the human being would be in is when they are fulfilling their existential purpose. So sin, all sin creates imbalance in creation. Right? Right? And if that happens, that imbalance, sin, what does it cause? Divine barakah, divine blessing, goes away. And the earth itself becomes corrupted. Right? That spiritual corruption, the spiritual corruption of sin, corrupts not only the humans engaging in it, but corrupts the earth in terms of its spiritual purpose of the earth is not fulfilled. That's why the people of good, we know for both hadith and Qur'an, that when the righteous die, the heavens and the heavens and the earth cry for the righteous person who died. One of the things Allah tells us about the corrupt, that the heavens and the earth did not cry for them. We know in the hadith on the one who seeks knowledge of the good, that in al-alim, the person of knowledge, the birds in the sky and the fish in the oceans, حتى حيتان البحر, seek forgiveness for the person spreading beneficial knowledge out of contentment for what they're engaged in, because they're making the world good. Right? They're fulfilling the existential potential. And even the animals perceive that. That's why the earth will bear witness for you or against you. When you walk to the masjid, نَكْتُبُ مَا قَدَّمُوا وَآثَارَهُم, in Surah Yasin, we record all that they sent forth of their actions, and we record their traces. The ground bears witness for you. When you're walking towards the good, the ground bears witness for you if you remember Allah upon it. That's why of the many wisdoms of after we do our prayers, our fard prayer, it's recommended to move to a different location, even if slightly, to do our sunnah. Because then two places on earth will be bearing witness for you. Of course, you can't do it in the same prayer that you do each. You just walk around while doing the same prayer. Don't get bad ideas. Agreed? Right? Like you don't do a typewriter prayer. First rak'ah you go rightwards, second rak'ah you go leftwards. Okay? That's not, each separate prayer, you move. Okay? And it's sunnah, but there's wisdoms behind it. That's why some of the early Muslims used to do their morning dhikr while walking. Right? And that bears witness for you. Right? So corruption has, and this diminishment of barakah, and barakah is subtle, but the barakah comes when things are in right order. Right? Because barakah is a subtle divine secret of increase that Allah places in things when you take the means of putting them in good order. Allah is merciful and generous. That subtle increase that He gives, when you do your best to put things in good order, right? But when you put things in wrong order, what happens? That divine facilitation misses its point because of that corruption. And that can create a negative effect. Another meaning of corruption is, the third meaning is fasadu tadbir, is corrupt planning. Right? Corrupt planning. Because the believer is one who sees meaning and purpose in creation. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. The believer is one who sees that everything that we see, the things around us, the things we have, as being an amana and a gift. A trust, so we have responsibility over it, and a gift that we are supposed to express gratitude for. But how? By directing any blessing towards the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that sense, everything is a gift. Sickness is a gift. Why? Why is sickness a gift? It's a kafara, but it's an opportunity for good. Right? Someone is sick. What are the opportunities of good in sickness?
Visiting the sick.
No, but if you get sick, one is the good of faith, right? That you remember that all things are from Allah. So you accept it. You don't object. You have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have gratitude for what He has blessed you with. Because let's say you got the flu, but are you alive? Yes. Is your heart beating? Yes. Do you still have faith? Yes. Do you still have guidance? Right? We have one thing, we imagine that everything revolves around it, right? So corrupt planning, right, is an imbalance, right? Where we plot to do that which is contrary to balance in our religion, in our worldly life, right? And it's been used in this sense in the Qur'an, right? Right? But also corrupt planning in the sense of people who plan rather than what is purposeful planning. At-tadbir al-salih is when you look at what you have and look towards what you seek with the concern of salah, of good. Like the good that I have, how do I fulfill its good? And what do I seek? I seek the good. In uridul islaha mastata'at. I seek only to make things good as much as I can, as the great Prophet said. It is mentioned in the Qur'an. Right? As for disbelievers, some certain disbeliever, وَيُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, right? They plan corruption on earth. Because what they have, they direct it towards corruption, towards creating this imbalance. And they seek to spread that imbalance. And they imagine that they're benefiting from it. A third usage of fasad is spoiling the fruits. Spoiling the fruits, spoiling what is good in creation. Right? That Allah has made a natural order in things, and they're good things. Well, people go and ruin the fruit, and this is not just the physical fruits, but the results of things. And one of the ways of corruption is to try to pick fruits before their time. That's called fasad. Right? Hastiness is fasad, because before something could come to fruit, you plucked it from its potential. Changing religion, corrupting religion, right, by different ways, right? Like what previous peoples did by changing revelation, deliberately misinterpreting revelation, hiding divine guidance. Right? This is fasad. Or using religion not for its purposes, but rather for self-gain. For self-gain. And that is, in Al-Hasan al-Basri said, عقوبة أهل العلم موت القلب. The punishment of people of knowledge is the death of hearts. And the person who heard this was surprised. He says, how is that? He says, بطلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة, by seeking the worldly through next worldly works. Right? Because that is corrupting, taking things out of the right order. Why are you seeking knowledge? Oh, I don't like bad company and people doing this. It's a comfortable job. You figured out that you have an uncle who's retiring as an imam, in rural Austria. You just got to know about him. So I'll become friends with him. I'll spend a few years studying, and then I got a job for life. I have a friend of mine who spent time at the Vatican, and he realized that he said, oh, at least 1 in 8. That was his estimate. It may have changed. At least 1 in 8 ministers he met he didn't really believe. Why they keep? It's a historical phenomenon. There have been people like that throughout history. Why did they keep working as a minister? It's a job for life. Right? And that is fasad. Right? That's also fasad. Right? So this should give us things to reflect about. Right? So what is the point of all of this? Right? What's the point of this? That if we just look at these two last terms, sickness, right? That this relates to, there's all kinds of health, but health comes from right balance. Right balance. And it comes by promoting the potential for good that is within, and by refraining the potential for ill that's within. Right? And when there are ill thoughts and ill inclinations, those are meant to be restrained. Right? Whim, etc. And the good inclinations and thoughts are meant to be. Health is when the negative thoughts from within are sublimated and the good thoughts are cultivated. But health, the health of the heart, also you connect the heart to the sources of good inclination. Because by good company, by beneficial knowledge, by inspiration, right? By seizing opportunities of good, one cultivates the health of the heart. But there are also negative influences. If you let the negative influences come in, then you're cultivating sickness. But it may creep in from where you could never imagine, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Qur'an. Likewise, corruption. And there's a sound order within you and around you. Right? Sound order is by gratitude. What is gratitude? By directing blessings towards what Allah created them for. Right? And the opportunities in life are from those blessings. You hear someone is sick, like, yeah, everybody's getting sick. Now, that's not some major corruption. You didn't make them sick. Was the missed opportunity? You know the person. You could have called him, you could have visited them, called them, messaged them, done whatever. So, that's a minor corruption. It's not particularly harmful, but things can become bigger. You walk by someone, it's an opportunity. Someone's fallen down. Now, why does Allah put you in contact with something like that? Because the natural order, that when there's an opportunity of good, you fulfill the potential of that by doing it. There's a temptation. That's a blessing. How's a temptation a blessing? You walk by a very attractive person. How is that a blessing? Yeah, by turning away from it. By turning away from it. Right? Because if you turn towards that matter, that is corruption. Because you allow something to come in that imbalances, that creates, that disturbs that right order that Allah has placed within. Right? That because what is the right order within? The right order within, and we'll close with this. Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi mentions elsewhere. The right order within is that, in one way of looking at the human self, is that you have 3 aspects to yourself. And this can be broken down more. Right? You have your heart, You have your qalb, which inclines towards Allah and the hereafter. That's your angelic self. And that encompassed by the heart. And then you have your animal self, which is your desires and whims. And then you have your intellect. The successful person is the one who makes choices that cultivate their angelic potential, even in their worldly choices, through good intentions, through gratitude, through consideration of goodness in their choices. Right? That's the role of the intellect. So the intelligent person is the one whose reason directs them and who restrains their wayward potential. And that's Salah. The Prophet ﷺ summarized this, and we'll close with this. He said, alayhi salatu wasalam, Al-Kayyisu man dana nafsahu. The smart person is the one who restrains themselves, and restrains their lower self. From what? From those negative potentials that, if allowed to express themselves harmfully, will create corruption within. And so what's the role there? To restrain it. Al-Kayyis man dana nafsahu. The smart person, the one whose reason is rightly directed, restrains their lower self, restrains their animal self, channels it towards the good and not beyond. وَعَمِلَ لِمَا بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. And who acts for what comes after this life, which is your salah, right? Which is towards the pleasure of Allah and what is of eternal good to you. وَالْعَاجِزِ. And the incapable person is the one who just follows مَنْ أَتْبَعَ نَفْسَهُ هَوَاهَا. The one who just follows the whims of their lower self, and then has false hopes with Allah. ثُمَّ تَمَنَّ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Because that's, you've allowed yourself to corruption. Right? And this is the constant themes of the Qur'an, is your heart. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. And the opposite of the sound heart is al-qalb al-fasid, is the corrupted heart. Right? So this is a very important concept, to know what is fasad. There's sometimes fleeting thoughts of fasad that come from within. Those must be. Taqwa is to reject inward notions of fasad and external notions of fasad, but also to know what causes internal negative stimuli, and to keep away from external sources of negative influence. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-mar'u ala dini khalili. A person will be on the religious way. And deen can refer to religion, but also religious ways, or on the ways in general of their close friends. فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْ. So let each of you look as to whose close company you keep. Because you keep good company, it will cultivate salah. You keep negative company, it'll cultivate fasad. Sometimes it can be outright, sometimes it can be slow. Right? Because sometimes you can just bash yourself in one go. You can also chisel away. Sometimes the straight up harm is easier to recover from than the gradual chiseling away. Right? Because both are wrong. You made some big blunder, you realize you could rectify. But the little drip that wears away your iman ends up being just as harmful as the sucker punch. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shield ourselves from all manifestations of corruption. Corruption through sin, corruption, through planning in harmful ways, not spoiling the fruits of our own works, and not to change the religion of Allah in any matter. And next class, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we look at the usages in the Qur'an of walking. And we'll touch a little bit about the walking of the Prophet ﷺ. In a different work, and we'll quote one of the other works of Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, where he tells us, it's an amazing expression. One of my favorite expressions, al-mashyu bil-qalb, that walking is with the heart. He explains a little bit about the walking of the Prophet ﷺ. And the usages of dress, because dress is not only physical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells about libasul taqwa. So what is the reality of dress? And what is evil and what is loss? So we look at, that there's two types of walking, 2 usages for walking in the Qur'an, 5 usages for dress, 8 usages for evil, for su'. And we'll also look at loss, khizi. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for fulfillment and understanding. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Any questions before we close? Alhamdulillah. This is a question, how do I benefit from this class? One of the great benefits is to reflect. When one learns things like this, one calls to reflect and see, okay, how do I, the meanings of benefit, how do I cultivate them in my life? And the meanings of harm, how can I use these to change? And ultimately, it's about seeking to change gradually, deliberately, from how we are to how Allah has called us to be. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.